The Qatar vs. Bahrain Maritime Delimitation and Territorial Questions case is the first major maritime delimitation dispute settled by the International Court of Justice since 1993. Qatar and Bahrain are both located in the southern part of the Persian Gulf. Traditionally, maritime and territorial boundaries between Qatar and Bahrain were loose and unofficial boundaries where no exact limitation were affiliated with each country's borders or controlled waters. However, as oil extraction in the maritime domain exponentially increased after World War I, the desire among Qatari and Bahraini governments to ensure access to rights to oil on the sea floor would ignite a new discourse around maritime boundaries. By 1947, with the British government being the only regional actor with the capacity to establish a seabed boundary, Qatar and Bahrain tasked the British with creating the first ever continental boundary by a third party.
With Qatar and Bahrain receiving complete political independence from Britain in 1971, political tensions between the two nations dramatically increased without Britain to mediate disputes. However, by 1976, Saudi Arabia became the principal mediator between the two countries and established a framework to address the delimitation boundary issue. In 1983, a framework was approved as a dispute resolution doctrine during a tripartite meeting between Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Bahrain. Of the most important principles presented at the meeting were the first, fourth, and fifth. The first principle called for all issues of sovereignty, territorial waters, and maritime boundaries to be solved comprehensively. The fourth principle provided for the formation of a tripartite committee for the purpose of approaching the International Court of Justice. The fifth principle stated that if the negotiations provided in the fourth principle failed to reach an agreement, all parties would solve the dispute using international law.
In 1987, after an exchange of letters between Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Bahrain, it was concluded that the three states would take the maritime dispute to the ICJ for a final ruling binding on both parties. Soon after, Qatar drafted a joint letter speaking for both itself and Bahrain, stating that special permission would be granted to the ICJ to rule on the matter. A final agreement was made in 1990 recognizing official discussion minutes between all three members, saying that all parties may bring the dispute to the ICJ should they fail to reach the resolution by 1991. Qatar finally decided to institute proceedings unilaterally against Bahrain in 1991 after no resolution was made. Immediately, Bahrain contested the jurisdiction of the court, arguing the parties had not concluded the special agreement, so there is no jurisdictional basis for the claim. Bahrain referenced a situation with historical legal precedent in the Aegean Sea continental shelf case between Greece and Turkey in 1978. In this case, the court ruled that Greece's conclusion that a joint press communication between the two countries, which stated that the dispute should be settled by peaceful negotiations, did not equate to Turkey's consent to bring the dispute to the ICJ. This case highlights how the 1983 principles in Qatar vs. Bahrain case does not provide consent by Bahrain.
In the court's first judgment in 1991, the focus was not what the court should be ruling on, but rather if the court should rule at all. The court decided that the 1987 exchange of letters and the 1990 minutes were international agreements binding upon the parties. Additionally, the court found that the minutes were not only a simple record of negotiation, but also equated rights and duties in international law for both parties. Qatar and Bahrain had different views on the interpretation of the Arabic term al-Tarafan. This term was used in the 1990 minutes by the Saudi government, and Bahrain argued that it meant both parties, whereas Qatar understood it as meaning each party. The court interpreted the term in light of its context and its aim, and came to the conclusion that it meant an alternative approach and not a cumulative approach. Therefore, the court interpreted the 1990 minutes as allowing a unilateral application by each of the parties, Qatar being the country that took advantage of the opportunity.
Two major points must be highlighted concerning implications in international legal precedents. The first is that this case demonstrates how an international agreement can create rights and obligations constituted by the signatories of minutes of meetings and letters exchanged. The second is that when cases are submitted to the ICJ, differences of language, and specifically the certain contexts of words, when translated into English, may not capture the exact original meaning of the word. This issue was highlighted in the case when ideas of cumulative and alternative interpretations of al-Tarafan were not perfectly represented in the ICJ's English discussions.
Regarding the specific outcome of the case concerning the line drawn for the new maritime boundary, the ICJ took into account historical claims, regional investments, local populations, and new mapping technologies. This allowed the ICJ to solve a wide range of issues to ensure the most accurate and fair boundary delimitation was made.